Take your 2 weeks and clear your desk. That's what the CEO's nephew, Dylan Mercer, said to me in front of the entire acquisition committee. Like he was delivering a TED Talk nobody asked for. 28 years old, perfect hair, empty head. He leaned back in his ergonomic chair as if he'd just invented capitalism. The buyers, 4 executives from a private equity firm out of Boston, stared at him the way you'd look at a raccoon trying to drive a Tesla. One of them, a guy with a Mont Blanc pen and the permanent expression of a man allergic to nonsense, scribbled something in his folder. Another discreetly tilted their phone toward the table. Recording. I didn't speak. I just smiled. The kind of smile that shows up after months of watching a car crash in slow motion while everyone else insists it's a parade. Dylan thought he was performing his grand finale, the big leadership move that would show the world he was more than just the CEO's family hire. He thought he'd finally handled the woman who'd built Atlas Dynamics' operational backbone from scratch over the last 8 years. He had no idea that the 2 weeks he just offered me were the last ones he'd ever spend in a meeting room. Hell, if he was lucky, they'd even let him keep his badge long enough to use the restroom indoors. Let's pause. If you're the kind of person who listens to stories like this while rage jogging around your HOA or scrubbing off the workday at 11 p.m., hit subscribe. Keeps the lights on, fuels the caffeine budget, and helps the team drop more workplace chess matches right into your feed. All right, back to Dylan's funeral with PowerPoint slides. He strutted into that conference room in a tight navy blazer and too much cologne, flanked by a junior HR rep and a strategic transformation consultant, which, in plain English, meant a frat buddy with a new LinkedIn Premium trial. His slideshow was already frozen on the title. Atlas 2.0 streamlined, synergized, savage. Yes, really. The buyers sat in perfect corporate stillness, poker-faced, calm, surgical. They'd flown in from Logan the night before. These weren't casual investors. They were the kind of people who could smell operational rot before they even opened a binder. And Dylan? Dylan was wrought in a tailored suit. Jordan's been a huge part of our legacy team, he said, his tone pretending to honor me while backing my career over a cliff. But we're moving in a new direction. Lean, agile, aggressive. She'll be stepping down after a brief transition period. 2 weeks should be plenty. He didn't even glance my way. Just kept pacing, hands slicing the air like punctuation marks for stupidity. What he didn't know, and what made the buyer's sideways glances so delicious, was that he'd just handed a loaded weapon to someone who already knew how to shoot. For the past 2 months, I'd been quietly working with Baxter Holdings, the very firm sitting across from him. Not because I begged for relevance or wanted revenge. No, because when the old CEO, Richard Lowell, retired without warning, Dylan walked in with a badge he printed himself and a mug that said, "Born to Lead, Eventually." Someone had to make sure the company didn't implode before the ink dried on the deal. So, I answered questions. I cleaned up his tantrums. I rescheduled vendor audits he didn't realize he'd canceled. And when Baxter's VP of Integration asked me to flag any red flags, I didn't snitch. I just forwarded the right emails, attached the right spreadsheets, highlighted the right names. I stayed quiet, but Dylan didn't. He copied the buyers on memos where he openly took credit for 6-month plans I built. He removed me from leadership briefings and bragged about it. And now, here he was, dismissing me like an intern who forgot to bring coffee, completely unaware that I'd been sitting 3 steps ahead on the chessboard the entire time. Across the table, Baxter's CEO, a silver-haired man named Greg Mason, hadn't blinked once. His hands were folded neatly on a binder marked Transition. A single yellow sticky note peeked from page 14. That sticky note was my fuse, and Dylan Mercer had just lit the match. The day Richard Lowell, our longtime CEO, walked out for the last time, nobody in the building even knew who was technically in charge. Then Dylan showed up. Late, of course. wearing that cheap badge he'd printed at home and holding a mug that said, Boss Energy. He called an all-hands meeting before even learning anyone's name. Walked into the glass conference room with swagger and caffeine breath and declared, "We're going to disrupt some silos, people." That was the exact moment I knew we were in trouble. There was no transition binder, no handover memo, no password list, no compliance roadmap, not even a payroll calendar. Just a Slack message from HR saying, Dylan Mercer will be assuming executive oversight until further notice. Notice never came. Chaos did. Within a week, department heads were calling me directly. Legal needed signatures no one had authority to give. It was locked out of a systems dashboard Dylan claimed he had access to. He didn't. He thought master access was a vibe, not a credential. Finance couldn't push Q3 disbursements because Dylan kept replying, "Let's circle back," to every thread like it was a magic spell. So, I kept the lights on. Vendor negotiations, compliance filings, department budgets, payroll. I wrote half the operational continuity playbook myself on my own time, because if I didn't, the entire acquisition would collapse into a fog of unpaid invoices and expired NDAs. I was exhausted. Physically, mentally, spiritually. Like the universe kept whispering, "You're not done yet." And I was whispering back, "Then send someone else." But I couldn't stop. I'd built too much of this place with my own two hands. The warehouse logistics model? Mine. The supplier scorecard matrix? Mine. The hurricane contingency plan that got us a risk rating upgrade? Also mine. I'd taken chaos and turned it into a $600 million acquisition target, and they'd handed the final lap to a man who once asked me if P&L was a sports drink. So, when Baxter Holdings transition analyst, a woman named Mira Tran, reached out quietly with, "Hey, do you have any kind of continuity framework you'd recommend?" I didn't hesitate. I didn't give her a speech. I gave her stability. One document, password protected, dated, and bullet pointed. No ego, no politics, just bones and systems. I wasn't trying to save myself. I'd already emotionally packed my desk, but I wasn't going to let Atlas, the company I'd bled for, get gutted by a man who thought operational strategy was a playlist name. Mira replied an hour later. "This is gold. Can I copy Dylan in?" "Better not yet," I wrote back. That was the turning point. Suddenly, I was copied on threads I was never supposed to see. Internal risk assessments, transition schedules, HR forecasts tied to change of control clauses. At first, it was subtle. My name quietly CC'd with 6 others. Then, a week later, Mira sent a direct message. "Jordan, can you confirm the vendor onboarding timeline you'd recommend for scenario B?" She didn't say, "Can you check with Dylan?" She said, "Jordan." That's when everything shifted. A few days later, an email landed in my inbox. No subject, no message body. Just an attachment from Baxter's legal team titled Atlas Transition Staffing Draft Internal Review. I opened it expecting boilerplate, but there, in section headers and legalese, was one blank line. Continuity lead. An empty seat waiting to be filled. I didn't touch it. I just flagged it and dragged the email into a folder named Just in Case. Because in corporate wars, victories don't happen in boardrooms. They happen in footnotes, in draft versions, in CC lines, in tiny clauses no one reads until it's too late. The first thing Dylan did after ordering a company-wide rebrand using fonts he found on TikTok was to remove me from all strategic calls. "Ops shouldn't be in the room for vision," he said, with the confidence of someone who once failed Intro to Economics twice. I didn't argue. Just sipped my lukewarm coffee and quietly tagged every cancellation email in red. Then he brought in his college buddy, Bryce Hammond, self-titled Director of Strategic Transformation. A man with the charisma of soggy toast and the intellect of a screensaver. No one knew what his job meant, not even him. But he did show up with a standing desk, a GoPro for Zoom calls, and a whiteboard full of buzzwords like scalable, disruptive, and hyper-lean. Within days, the cracks began to show. Bryce optimized the vendor payment queue by removing 2 legal approval steps. Within 48 hours, one of our suppliers drove to HQ demanding payment and threatening to repossess leased servers. I found Dylan in the break room, laughing with Bryce over protein bars. "Maybe if you focused less on being alarmist," he said, "and more on being adaptive, this wouldn't happen. You're just ops, Jordan. Let strategy handle the big stuff." Just ops. That's when I stopped trying to save him. I started taking notes instead, quietly, meticulously, step by step, mapping exactly how this house of cards would collapse when gravity finally noticed it existed. The unraveling started quietly, like a leak no one hears until the floor caves in. 3-year vendor partnership? Gone. Bryce missed the renewal deadline. Security audit? Incomplete. He delegated it to automation. The buyers noticed. Hard not to when a $600 million deal suddenly smelled like smoke. I got a frantic ping from finance. "Do we have any backup vendors scoped?" Of course we did. I'd built a failover list back in Q1 because I knew we'd need it by Q3 if Dylan kept steering the ship blindfolded. I handed it off, quietly, cleanly, no CCs, and that was the moment Baxter Holdings started watching me instead of him. A few nights later, my phone buzzed. A direct message from Mira Tran, Baxter's VP of Integration. "You okay? Just checking on you." 6 words, soft but sharp. The kind of line that meant, "We see you. We know who's really running this company." I didn't cry. I calculated. Because if Mira was reaching out directly, that meant my silence had become louder than Dylan's noise. I typed back, "Yes, but you might want to request page 14, paragraph 3E in the staffing agreement." I didn't explain what it said. I didn't need to. Because 3E was the ghost clause. The one no one reads. The one that said, "The designated continuity lead shall retain sole veto power over any staffing transition that could affect operational integrity." It had been blank, but not for long. The first briefing happened by accident. Or maybe by fate. I stayed on a Zoom call 2 minutes longer than I should have. Dylan had delegate fatigue, his words, so he forwarded the invite to me without reading the agenda. The meeting was supposed to cover asset inventories, but Alan Brewer, Baxter's Director of Transition Strategy, asked, "Do you have clean vendor metrics for the last 3 fiscal years?" Dylan blinked like someone had asked him to translate ancient Greek. I waited a beat, then said, "Yes. Second tab of the ops metrics doc, shared last Thursday. Rows 41 through 62. Silence. Then Alan replied, "Perfect. That's exactly what we needed." Dylan grinned weakly, pretending he'd known it all along. 10 minutes after the call, I got a message. Not from Dylan, not from HR, from Baxter's integration office. "Would you be open to a short side-channel chat about continuity risks?" Side-channel, corporate code for this conversation, never happened. I hesitated. Not out of fear, but precision. I wasn't a whistleblower. I wasn't breaking NDAs. I wasn't out to burn anything down. But I wasn't going to sit quietly while Dylan's ego turned Atlas Dynamics into a bonfire of incompetence either. So I said yes. 15 minutes off calendar. 1 call. Informal alignment, they called it. That 1 call turned into 3 more by the end of the week. I didn't gossip. Didn't editorialize. Didn't even mention Dylan by name unless they did first. I just answered what was asked. "Do we have a risk matrix for post-close?" "Yes, built it in Q2. "Any issues with the compliance migration?" Yes, audit trail attached, page 3, line 17. Signs of leadership misalignment on Q4 deliverables. I sent 2 conflicting strategy decks, one from finance, one from Dylan's Slack-fueled fever dream titled Project Phoenix 2.0. By the third call, the tone shifted. Alan was joined by Mira, then Baxter's legal counsel, and another executive from corporate risk. They stopped calling it a chat. It became a review. And then came the question. If there were an ideal role for you post-close, something to maintain continuity and minimize risk, what would it be? I didn't blink. Interim COO, transition, Americas. Not permanent. Not flashy, just factual. Mira nodded, typing something I couldn't see. 2 days later, a file hit my inbox labeled Transition Staffing Notes, Internal Only. Not signed, not final. But my name was there. A box next to it, checked. Meanwhile, Dylan was too busy planning his vision day, brainstorming with beanbag chairs, kombucha, and a whiteboard full of nonsense about disrupting legacy culture. He had no idea that the legacy he was trying to disrupt had already outmaneuvered him 3 steps ahead. The irony was cosmic. While he was sketching flowcharts, I was already being written into the next chapter, buried in the footnotes, where real power always hides. He didn't understand contracts. He understood confidence, and confidence doesn't hold up well against evidence. It started with a Slack announcement that made my stomach drop. Big win, team! We've migrated all compliance workflows to a new SaaS platform. Faster, cheaper, smarter. Let's disrupt legacy. He'd even added a lightning bolt emoji. I read it 3 times just to confirm that Dylan really had written Disrupt Legacy about a compliance system that handled federal audit logs, legal disclosures, and half the data the acquisition depended on. Within an hour, my inbox turned into a siren. Legal couldn't access documentation. Vendor management couldn't log in. Procurement was locked in a queue with a chatbot named Savvy, who answered every question with, "I'm still learning." Then the real hits landed. 5 of our key suppliers froze onboarding completely. Their W-9s, background checks, and payment routing were missing from the new system. One even sent a formal notice through counsel threatening to withdraw if the issue wasn't fixed by EOD. Meanwhile, Dylan was hosting Transformation Thursday in the break room, drinking cucumber water and sketching something that looked like a flowchart for disaster. By the time he finally waddled into the war room, finance was on the verge of spontaneous combustion. "We've got a minor hiccup," he said, smiling like a man who'd just rear-ended a fire truck and wanted credit for hitting the brakes. "You migrated compliance without legal review," I said flatly. "It's plug and play. The vendor said their AI scales with our needs. The AI doesn't file SEC disclosures, Dylan." He blinked like the acronym had just been invented. Within an hour, Baxter Holdings was on the call. Mira didn't raise her voice, didn't even frown. She just asked one question. "Who authorized the software migration?" Dylan opened his mouth, ready to improvise his way into another catastrophe, but I raised a hand. "Before we go there," I said, "I'll send over a full breakdown. Timestamps, threads, and change logs." 10 minutes later, I emailed the packet, clean, time-stamped, objective. Every decision chain, every Slack approval, every ignored warning, each one pointing directly back to him. Then, predictably, Dylan tried to rewrite history. He told Baxter's execs that I had left gaps in the old system, that he was future-proofing operations, that I'd resisted innovation. What he didn't realize was that I had proof of his version of innovation, screenshots of his late-night messages. "Let's just rip the Band-Aid off. No need to overthink it." When I sent that second packet, Mira's reply contained one word. Received. No emojis, no follow-up. Just that word. The corporate equivalent of a knife being sharpened. 48 hours later, meeting notes started circulating from Baxter's internal integration sync. I wasn't officially invited, but my name appeared 3 times in the agenda. Review vendor impact timeline. Jordan R. to lead assess system restoration plan. JR to advise audit summary handoff. Jordan R. Dillon's name wasn't mentioned once. That was when it hit me. This wasn't about cleanup anymore. This was elimination. He wasn't just incompetent. He was a liability to a deal that had already been structured without him. So I stopped helping him. Stopped explaining. Stopped warning. I just watched. Documented. Waited. Because fools self-destruct. But frauds? They get escorted out. The final contract had been sitting in my inbox for 2 weeks. I hadn't opened it, not because I was scared, but because I already knew what was inside. It was labeled Atlas Baxter Transition Staffing Agreement, Final Draft, sent by legal, signed by Dillon without reading. He probably assumed it was just routine paperwork for HR to file. He didn't realize that the most dangerous sentences in corporate America aren't shouted in meetings. They're buried in page 14, paragraph 3E. That morning, after Bryce sent another company-wide memo blaming legacy workflows for their own mess, I finally opened the file. 73 pages of legal jargon, charts, staffing matrices, signature fields. And there it was. All staffing decisions related to transition phase operations must receive final approval from the designated continuity lead, whose authority may not be overridden by temporary or interim executives not ratified by the board. Continuity lead, Jordan R. Hale. My name. Plain text. No bold, no italics, just power, sitting quietly in black and white. I stared at it until the weight settled in. They'd buried a landmine inside the contract. Dillon had signed it, and now all I had to do was wait for him to step on it. I didn't feel giddy, not even triumphant. When I saw my name printed under continuity lead, the emotion that hit wasn't joy. It was control. Cold, precise, electric control. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about steering the ship through the storm without the idiot who thought he owned the ocean. I highlighted the clause, forwarded the contract to my personal email with the subject line, just in case, and leaned back in my chair. Through the glass wall of my office, I could see Dillon laughing at something Bryce had pulled up on his phone. Some leadership meme about staying adaptable. They were drinking matcha smoothies that looked like swamp water, oblivious. He thought he was running the transition. He didn't realize I was the transition. The next morning, I woke to a company-wide email from Dillon. Subject line: Exciting news, Atlas Dynamics enters a bold new chapter. It was a 6-paragraph word salad. Half startup buzzwords, half inspirational quote graveyard. As we finalize our acquisition by Baxter Holdings, he wrote, I want to thank everyone for their resilience, innovation, and commitment to seamless continuity during this transformational journey. I stopped on that word, continuity. The irony was exquisite. He had no clue that the person guaranteeing that seamless continuity was the same woman he'd been cutting out of every meeting for the last 2 months. No idea that the clause he'd signed in blind faith was about to flip the chessboard upside down. No idea that by tomorrow morning, his title would mean as much as the paper in the printer tray. Around 3 p.m., a message popped into my inbox from Greg Mason, Baxter's CEO. Just 5 words. Bring your card tomorrow. GM. No punctuation, no context. But I understood immediately. That wasn't a request. It was a move. The final one. The office buzzed that afternoon like a hive that didn't know it was about to be smoked. Balloons in the break room. Catering orders for the integration kickoff. Bryce tried to start a chant. One team, one dream. Someone actually printed t-shirts that said Atlas X Baxter with a rocket icon. I kept my headphones in, working quietly while the noise bounced off the walls. Inside, I was sharpening knives. Not literal ones, the kind made of paper, policy, and patience. I opened the calendar invite for tomorrow's big meeting. The title had changed. It no longer said Leadership Transition Review. It now read, Post-Close Executive Realignment. Corporate language is an art. That phrase didn't mean promotion, it meant termination. Someone was about to be realigned right out of the company. Then HR sent me a draft of my transition statement, my farewell. I'd seen these before. Polite, hollow, written like a Hallmark card in Excel. But this one was different. Jordan Hale's leadership has been instrumental in preserving operational integrity throughout this critical transition. Her systems-first approach and deep institutional knowledge have positioned Atlas Dynamics for long-term success. We look forward to her continued impact in the next chapter. I reread that last line 3 times. We look forward to her continued impact. HR doesn't write that by accident. Not unless someone above them told them to. Dylan must have skimmed it, too self-absorbed to notice. Probably signed off thinking continued impact meant I'd train my replacement and fade quietly into the sunset. I didn't correct him. Let him print it. Let him rehearse his little goodbye speech. Let him walk right into the moment where the boardroom turns into a courtroom and the only exhibit that matters is page 14. That night, I went home and actually slept. The deep kind. No anxiety, no noise, no nightmares. Because by 9 o'clock a.m., the stage would be set. The contract would be opened. The card would be handed over. And Dylan Mercer would finally learn what happens when you underestimate the person who keeps your empire from falling apart. Dylan strutted into the boardroom like a man walking on a red carpet only he could see. New tie. Too loud. Hair slicked back like a campaign ad. And that grin, that same polished smirk he'd practiced in the mirror every morning since nepotism handed him a keycard. It was 9 o'clock a.m., sharp. The room itself looked like every corporate war room before the fall. Mahogany table, chrome pictures, logo-branded folders no one would read. Baxter Holdings sat on one side, calm, poised, the quiet predators in navy suits. Atlas Dynamics sat on the other, fidgeting, rehearsed smiles, false confidence. I sat in the back corner, no nameplate, no folder. I didn't need one. Let's get started, Dylan said, pacing in front of the screen. We're excited, aligned, and ready for the next evolution of Atlas Dynamics, a leaner, smarter, more agile future. He said it like he'd invented adjectives. Then he looked right at me. I also want to thank Jordan Hale, he added, voice dipped in fake gratitude. After 8 incredible years, she'll be stepping down following a 2-week transition period. He smiled. Bryce nodded like a backup dancer. HR took notes. And me? I reached into my bag, calm as gravity, and slid a matte black business card across the table to Greg Mason, the CEO of Baxter Holdings. White ink, simple font, Jordan R. Hale, Interim COO, Transition Operations Baxter Holdings, Americas. He took it, read it once, and then laughter. Not cruel laughter, not even mocking. It was sharp, clean, and real. The kind that erupts when someone finally sees the punchline to a long joke. Dylan blinked. Something funny? Greg didn't answer. He tilted the card toward Alan Brewer, the director of transition strategy. Alan read it, smiled, slow and knowing. The kind of smile that said, checkmate. Then Alan opened his binder. Page marked with a yellow sticky tab. No label, no notes. Page 14. Paragraph 3E. The air in the room thickened. I think maybe there's been some confusion, Dylan said, his voice cracking just slightly. Jordan doesn't represent Baxter Holdings. She's just here as legacy support. Mira spoke next, calm, deliberate, surgical. She represents transition leadership for Atlas Dynamics operational integration. That authority was granted legally by your own signature, Mr. Mercer. Dylan froze. No, that clause isn't binding. It was. Greg slid the contract across the table. Page 14, he said, tapping the sticky note. Dylan hesitated, then read aloud, voice trembling. Continuity lead shall have final authority over all transition staffing decisions related to operations, logistics, and compliance. Greg finished the line for him. And that continuity lead is Jordan R. Hale. The room went dead quiet. Bryce suddenly found something fascinating in the table grain. HR started typing furiously. Legal just watched. They'd seen this movie before. Dylan's jaw tightened. This can't be right. I didn't authorize. Greg raised a single finger. Your signature is on the agreement, Mr. Mercer. Page 17. He turned the document so everyone could see it, and there it was. Dylan Mercer, written in ink, below the line that effectively gave me command over all operational staff for the next 90 days. I didn't know what that meant, he muttered. That's clear, Greg said dryly. Dylan looked around for backup, but no one met his eyes. He was a king who just realized the board had been rearranged mid-game. Greg leaned back, voice smooth and unhurried. So, about those 2 weeks you offered Ms. Hale, he said. We're reallocating you to facilities operations in Kansas City, night shift. They could use help with forklift scheduling. Dylan blinked. You're serious? Extremely. He didn't sit, didn't shout. He just stood there, stunned, still, hollow, while the deal rolled forward without him. Mira handed me an envelope. Inside, a Baxter Holdings badge. My name, my title, my authority. I clipped it to my lapel. It clicked into place with a soft, decisive snap. Thank you, I said evenly. Looking forward to getting started. No one objected. No one dared, because it was over. As I walked toward the door, I heard Dylan's voice behind me. Small, cracked. She reports to you? Greg smiled, slow, precise. No, he said. She is me for the next 90 days. I didn't turn around. Didn't need to. I just walked out, leaving Dylan standing in the ruins of his imaginary empire, surrounded by silence, consequence, and the echo of the one thing he never understood. The quiet woman in the corner was never just ops. She was the end game.